This is Mandatory Listening, a podcast about the whats, whys, and hows of effective practical leadership shared by successful leaders and by your host, Dan Mann.
This is Mandatory Listening with your host, Dan Mann, joined as always by
Kent Mann.
Good morning, Kent.
Morning.
And how was your coffee today?
Oh, delicious. I'm on the second cup.
Well, we're sitting here in the middle of Hurricane Michael in Asheville today, and so hopefully our audience will tune out the driving rainstorm in the background.
The torrential downpour.
Yeah, hopefully it's nice and dry where you are today. We're joined today by a wonderful guest that we've been working on getting into the Mandatory Listening podcast. His name is Harry Paul. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Kent. And I'm jealous. I want some coffee now, too.
You're on the West Coast today, so up bright and early. Thank you for joining us early this morning.
Oh, my pleasure.
Harry, you're a well-known author and speaker across the world, but it's possible that some of our audience wouldn't know who you are. I could butcher an introduction of you, but I think you probably would do a better job than I am. Tell the audience a little bit about your background and some of what brings us here today.
Okay. Well, I got into this industry, let's call it the people development industry, purely by mistake, kicking and screaming. I was a book printer. I had my own little company. And back in 1980, two guys came to me and said, "We want you to print our book for us." And I go, "Sure." I give them an estimate, $7,500 for 5,000 copies. And they said, "We don't have any money. We would maybe be able to get some, but would you take a piece of this book in lieu of your bill?" And I looked at them and I said, "No, I want cash now." And that book was The 1 Minute Manager.
Oh, wow.
And that's yes.
Oh, yeah.
So, for a few years, I did kick and scream. Why didn't I say yes to that since it sold 20 million copies? But I became friends with them. And when I got tired of book printing, I went to Ken Blanchard and said, "Hey, we get along great. You want me to come into your company? I got lots of experiences in different areas." He said yes. And I worked for Ken for 16 years. And while I was there, I was managing his publishing and his speaking. So I got access to his black book and his contacts became mine. Fast forward to 1998, 99, these couple of guys did a video called Fish. And Ken loved it. And then Ken said, the two authors go, "Hey, we want to write a book. Ken, would you like to write the book with us?" Well, they did a manuscript. They offered it to Ken because, that was the proper way to do it. You write it, send it to Ken. Ken didn't like it. And he says, "Harry, I got too many projects. Would you tell them I'm not interested?" Well, after a couple of go-arounds and giving them feedback on the manuscript, and they knew that Ken would not be part of it, they offered the co-authorship to me. And I turned it down a couple of times because that's my track record. I turned down the 1 Minute Manager.
Turned down big money.
Yeah, why didn't I turn down Fish? Well, I finally said yes after 3 no's. And let's say the rest is history. I brought a publisher, I brought an editor, I brought a literary agent to the table, and we redid the manuscript. I worked on the parable part of it, sent it to 13 publishers, and we packed it with fresh fish from the Pike Place Fish Market, which the book and the video is based on. And out of the 13, 3 made offers.
Wow.
It was a good track record.
Sure.
And finally, we settled on Hyperion Books. Hyperion published it. And as a way of saying that we're going to publish it, we have an agreement. We sent them salmon from Seattle. They sent us bagels from New York. And it was a love affair after that. And the book came out, and it kind of was selling copies here and there because the video was very popular. But I knew a contact at Amazon who said, "We'll get you a PBM." And I'm thinking, that's not peanut butter and jelly. What's a PBM? It's a pass-by or mailing. And that's when email marketing was very new. We're talking 2000. And they at the time, a very popular book was Who Moved My Cheese? So they did a profile where they sent their mailing list who bought Who Moved My Cheese a email that said, if you like cheese, you'll love fish. Well, we sold 7,000 copies in one day, propelled it to the top of Amazon, and I still have the screenshot of being number one on Amazon because that's pretty special. And it propelled it to the top or near the top of every major bestseller list out there, and we stayed there for 6 years.
Unreal.
Damn.
And that's how I got to. And then once you're a best-selling author, you automatically become a professional speaker. Thankfully, I had the aptitude and the brains to learn how to do it well.
And you pick up a nickname called the Fish Guy.
Harry the Fish Guy. 68 years old and I'm the Fish Guy.
It sounds like we need to do another podcast with you on effective marketing of books.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, what works once doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work again. But you're right. It's that. Yeah. I think, you have your Man University with specialty retailing, etc. But I think there's a whole market out there for people that all of a sudden there's boxes of books sitting on their doorstep and they go, now what do I do?
Yeah. And I know that what created this for you was an insight and an understanding of what goes on in the Seattle fish market and how that can be translated into every business. And that created an expertise for you on the customer experience and how to deliver it, which I think brings us here today. And I know that's your core message as you travel around the world. Go ahead.
Oh, it is. But I also, over the years, as learning, customer service is one thing. Customer experience is better. But there has to be a culture within the organization that allows people to give those incredible customer experiences like they do at the fish market. And I think it goes hand in hand. It has to be part of who everyone is when they walk through, they cross that threshold to go to work that day. That culture has to allow them to say, this is who we are, and we wow customers. We give great customer experiences.
Yeah, and that is easier said than done. So let's get into that, because when you talk about culture, it's not just a mysterious ideology. It's a set of behaviors. It's a set of activities. It's a set of standards.
And it's trainable.
And it is trainable. So let's get into it. What do you think defines that kind of culture, Harry?
I think there's 5 things. And first of all, what I call is a culture of excellence. You should come to work and strive to be and give your best. That's a culture of excellence. Now, if you're not moving towards excellence, I believe you're moving the other direction towards average. And what I find scary out there is there's a lot of organizations that have excellent cultures, excellent product, excellent service, but we all hit speed bumps. When companies hit speed bumps, the first thing I think they do is, no, we're excellent. We see excellent. And they deny the fact that their excellence may be slipping and they're moving towards average. And when that happens, what I see in organizations is they start accepting that average that they slipped into as their excellence. And that's when companies and organizations get in trouble. So what I did with a co-author of mine, we did a book called Who Kidnapped Excellence? And we identified 5, we call it pillars. You could call it anything you want, ingredients, anything. 5 things that define a culture that's moving towards excellence. One is everyone has passion for what they're doing. The second is they're competent in what they do, both the technical skills and interpersonal skills. The third is that competency, both communication is the third skill, or the third pillar. That's how to communicate clearly. And what we strive in that, and this is perfect for retail, is the biggest part of communication is listening. The fourth is flexibility. You have to have a plan. You have to have policy. But geez, have the foresight and the sense to say, hey, It doesn't apply here. It's not going to work here. Let me change. And the fifth is take responsibility, take ownership. Those five things has to happen in a culture that allows it to be customer experience centric. And you think about it, you take any one of those out of the equation, it collapses into average. Everyone has great skills, but no passion. It collapses. And if you also look at those and drill down a little deeper, what's the opposite of passion? Indifference. What's the opposite of competency? Incompetent. The opposite of communication, miscommunication. The opposite of flexibility is inflexible. And God knows what the opposite of ownership is, not caring, posing, pretending to care. So you can see if you are not paying attention to those five pillars, you go the other direction. And that's when you start to accept average as your excellence.
I've come to the belief that it's very difficult for human beings to do an accurate job of evaluating themselves. That's why we need a coach. That's why we need someone to help us improve, whether it's in a diet we're doing or if it's in a training program of some sort, someone helping us, because it's so hard to see ourselves in reality. And I think businesses suffer from that same problem. They can't truly do an accurate job of evaluating their condition. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it wholeheartedly. We're too close to everything. As somebody who's been married over 30 years, that's why our wives keep on pointing out our flaws to us, and hopefully we'll change. It's the same thing in business. And the other thing is, businesses have to run so quickly nowadays. It's so competitive. It's hyperactive. Sometimes we don't have the ability to stop a step backwards and observe and see what's going on. And that's the challenge. We're too busy to pay attention to something that important. And that's when organizations get in trouble.
As you were saying, all those five traits, I was struck by you had some emphasis on communication and especially listening.
Yes.
And I think we would make the argument that communication, especially listening, giving feedback, giving accurate feedback, and then taking a step back is almost the pillar underneath the pillars. You can't have any of those without communicating, listening, without being able to evaluate your own flaws, your own blind spots. And so maybe you can chime in on that and the listening in particular.
Excellent point. It's almost like overarching, because everything, whether it's body language, whether it's communication, whether it's our marketing, what the store looks like, it does all start with communication. I always say, and I got this from a friend of mine who's a specialty retailer, Jack Mitchell in Connecticut. He says, if you have to grab them with warmth when they cross the threshold. And you think about that, that's communication. You just broadcast out who you are when you cross the threshold to my organization or his organization or any organization.
Well, let's go into the real opportunity here, which is the differentiator, which is our retailers and businesses in general who can actually execute on these things. So, building a team of flexible, responsible, passionate, competent folks who are good communicators and good listeners. Is it just a hiring play? Is it a training play? What are the building blocks of that culture as you see it?
Well, I think if you understand your culture well, you will hire people that can fit into the culture and enhance the culture. I've seen this fish market, for instance, that we talk about in the fish book and the fish video. They have a 60-day probationary period for new hires. And you would think, they have to learn how to fillet fish, cut fish, the different types of fishes, how to cook them, when people ask for their advice, all that. But it's something a lot more than the technical. Can this person fit into those 22 people, those 22 fishmongers, be part of their culture, live in the culture, and more importantly, enhance the culture? They hire for culture. Several years ago, I was on an American airline flight and I was reading The American Way because I think I just ran out of. That's when I was carrying hardback books instead of reading iBooks. You can't carry that many with you. So I was desperate, and I'm reading The American Way, and they talked about an ice cream store chain. I think it was Austin, Texas, called Amy's Ice Cream, and they were hiring people for a new store, and their whole culture is fun. Ice cream should be fun. I totally agree. And they ran out of applications. So they go, oh man, what are we going to do? We got a line of people trying to come to work here or want to work here. What do we do? And they said, well, let's give them a paper bag so they could fill out the information on it, because that's all they had. They didn't have any paper for some reason. So they handed them a white paper bag and said, fill out your information. What happened next was the unexpected, because people started drawing on the paper bag, doing other things with the paper bag other than giving their name and their resume, filling it with stuff. And all of a sudden it gave a window inside this person's head and personality, and it worked. And now, and I don't know if they still do it, instead of getting an application, they were giving out white paper bags and said, here, fill this out. This is your application to work here.
That's brilliant. A few episodes ago, we had a local, relatively young employee at a butcher shop who talked about his hiring process. I believe he called it a stage.
Yeah.
And then the butcher who hired him made him work for him for a day. It gave him cleaning responsibilities, gave him cleanup and rudimentary chores to see how he would be on the team.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that same idea of let's see what it looks like. Let's see what you would be like in an alternative way of capturing who you really are as a person.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of an interesting way of thinking about how we go about finding this match, this culture match.
Absolutely. You think about it, this person is your ambassador to the world. And if you don't pick wisely, they're going to chase customers away. They're not going to bring them back time and time again. It's so important that that person gets who you are, and what you're trying to convey. And the only real way to do that is let them try it. Just like the fishmonger, the fish market has that 60-day probationary period. And by the way, at the end of the 60-day probationary period at the Pike Place Fish Market, it is not the owner or the owners who decide if that person gets hired. It's the other fishmongers who have to work with them. Yes, this person gets our culture. No, this person never will. Or this person just needs a little fine-tuning and they'll be great. So it just mirrors exactly what you're saying. Live with it for a while to see if you like it, and it's going to work.
And that's some serious responsibility on the side of the fellow fishmongers, because they may be, hired 4 months ago, but now they're deciding if someone's going to work next to them instead of just the owner bringing in, all right, this is the new guy.
Right.
That's the responsibility piece you talked about a bit ago.
Yeah, that's taking ownership of the stall or the fish market.
Right. And then you look at the fish market, it's the number one tourist destination in Seattle. And when you think about that, it's, wow, more than the Space Needle or the Rock and Roll Museum there or any of the other attractions. People go to a fish market to watch them work. They must be doing something right. So these guys that get hired, once they pass that probationary period, they understand completely what it means to get the right person, because it's like they have a legacy to uphold. And that's what you're trying to do with your hires. It's your legacy, your organization.
Well, that's exactly right. So this then, step one for me seems like we just have to reinvent or at least refocus our efforts around hiring and selection. That job, that starts all the other work around our culture. We don't let the wrong elements into our culture. We guard and protect that culture. We create that culture so all of us own it. All of us on the team own it. And then that's the first step toward building this sort of culture of excellence.
I was going to ask, Harry, if you're a business owner, you're relatively new, or maybe you're trying to make a culture shift, How do you define and create a culture that you then hire to, train to, observe? How do you outwardly project the culture that is, hireable and trainable?
How do you define it?
Yeah.
Interesting, because what I talked about are the 4 pillars that you need to establish a culture that's moving towards excellence. But once you have that baseline, you hire people. Those people now become the culture, and everyone interacts differently with everyone else. So then it becomes very, very organic, the culture, because it's how I interact with you, but it might be how I interact with you and someone else when there's another person standing next to us. And I'm talking about the employee base. So that's when it becomes very organic, and that's what gets broadcast out. And it may sound difficult, but it's not, because your culture is defined by your people. And what goes even further than that is when you get that cooking, when you get those people working together and you have that foundation of a culture of excellence, it's so unique, it can't be duplicated by the competition. It's almost like your secret sauce, because you could take those, you could go to the fish market in Seattle, watch those guys, then go down the market there where they are. There are 3 other fish markets selling the same fish for the same price. We know one's the most successful, and we know one is the most famous. The other guys try it. It doesn't work. You have to kind of create it for yourself. It can't be duplicated, as I just said. It has to be you. It has to be everything that your people are and what they bring to work, good and bad, because let's face it, some people come to work and they've had challenges in the morning. They got cut out. They got flipped off on the road. They had an argument. The dog had an accident. Whatever it may be, they have to understand when they cross that threshold, they have to choose their attitude. They have to take it.
Nice. And that's how you, in the changing marketplace with, every potential product you could ever want on the internet, brick and mortar businesses are suffering left and right, allegedly. That's how you compete. And that's our argument, is you compete by investing in your people, developing your people, creating your culture, developing your culture, abiding, training to that. And that's the way to compete, not by bringing in the newest technology, not by bringing in, the latest and greatest flashy, shiny new product, because anyone can do that. That's not a culture. That's just a new selection.
Executing on culture is the real differentiator.
Yeah.
Well said, Kent and Dan. I always say, what's the most important part of an experience? Is it emotion or is it physical? What you described was physical. What do we want as people? The emotion. You go to a restaurant, the food is spectacular. Best meal you ever had. The service was indifferent. Was that a good or bad dining experience?
Yeah, it's going to be bad.
Yep.
Bad dining experience. They didn't make me feel good. The food is secondary. The product you just described, or the offering you just described, is secondary. What is important?
And the indifferent service made the food suffer.
Absolutely. Your food, your service, your product can be so much better if it's a good experience. They will focus only on one thing, and that's the experience and the product. Yeah, they have the best stuff around. Let me tell you a quick story that cements this absolutely beautifully. When my dad was in his mid-80s, he got a job part-time. Now, I'm smart enough to know it was my mom telling him to go get a job to get him out of the house. Now, he got a job at a Wawa 3 mornings a week. And I don't know if some of your people are going to know what a Wawa is. It's a convenience store chain. I think it's family owned. There's about 600 or 700 of them. They're very, very successful. 3 mornings of the week, he goes and makes coffee there. He loves the job. He's out to brunch with my mom or lunch with my mom one day, and it was his day off, and a customer spots him, walks up to him and says, "Hey, Jack, I was in Wawa this morning, had a cup of coffee. You know, it didn't taste nearly as good as when you're there making it." And my dad thanks the guy, and he turns to my mother and goes, "Sarah, how can that be? How could the coffee taste, better when I'm there making it?" Her typical response was, "I don't know. Leave me alone. Shut up. Eat your bagel." 60 years of marriage does that. And but he can't let it go. And then he goes, "Sarah, I know what it is." He goes, "I rinse the pots out really well before I make coffee." And I go, and she goes, yeah. Finish your food." He tells me this story, and I start to laugh. I said, "Dad, you really think that's the reason?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Isn't the coffee made by a machine?" "Yeah." "Isn't it filtered water and Wawa brand coffee?" "Yeah." "Well, how do you think the coffee tastes better when you're there making it? You think it's really the pots being rinsed?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "What? Do you think it could be anything else?" He goes, "No." I said, "Let me ask you a question. You like your job?" "Love it." "You like the people?" "Love them." "Do you share do they share themselves with you?" He goes, "I know so much about these people." I go, "Do they know anything about you?" He goes, "Probably too much." I said, "Dad, you're the mayor of Wawa. You make the coffee taste better." He goes, "No, it has to be the pots." I said, "Trust me, you make the coffee taste better." Well, they built a Wawa closer to where he lives. And let's face it, when you're in your mid-80s, you save 10 minutes on a commute, it's a big deal. So he moved to that Wawa. Scores of his customers followed him, unsolicited. Do you think it had anything to do with those pots being rinsed?
No.
Well, it was all about him. That's a perfect example of physical versus emotional. Same gosh darn coffee. He made it taste better. If a retired truck driver in his mid-80s can figure this, he got it. We all can do this. In fact, Wawa was writing a book called The Wawa Way about, I think it was 50 years or 75 years, I forget what it was, in retail. So brazen me, I call the CEO, and somehow I get to his personal assistant, explain to her who I am and the article and about my dad. And on page 100 of that book is that story.
Oh, that's
because they said that's who we are.
Yeah. And that exact, whether it's coffee and pots that we're talking about, or whether it's bikes and service, or whether it is, meat and butchering, whatever the category, that's the same emotional connection to a person and to an experience that people highly value. And I don't believe that valuing of that experience is decreasing. I think it's actually increasing in today's economy.
The value is, you're absolutely right. But is it being done enough?
No.
Because I get the feeling when I go into any retail outlet, most of the retail outlets, that they're hiring warm bodies without training.
Yep.
And to me, that's like going on the internet, except you have to drive to it.
Mm-hmm. We talked about this in a recent podcast. I want to bring it into focus here. The word retail, actually, if I'm not mistaken, the root word of retail is tailoring. And the concept of it actually goes back to old school construction of garments, where a professional, seasoned veteran tailor personally cut and sewed garments for a person who walked out with a unique, specific product designed for them, that it was tailored to them. And retailing comes from that idea, except today it has become so uniform and so universal and actually dumbed down to the lowest level of training, to the lowest level of education, and ultimately to the lowest level of compensation, so that these people at the front lines of retail aren't often valued, and they feel that they're not valued, both from the ownership of their business side and to some degree from the customer side, that then continues to cycle and continues to create and almost predict this very result we're talking about. And I think companies that especially retailers that intend to break this cycle, are really fighting an uphill battle, and they're fighting against the tide to create it. Once they do, it's such a pleasant surprise that I think consumers would be overwhelmed by that experience. I think it's a challenge to remake this, and I think it's possible, and I think, in fact, it has to happen for these businesses to thrive.
Absolutely agree with you. And even the big online, Amazon is opening up bookstores and mall. The business of retail is important. It's needed. It's wanted. But what you just said is we chase the customers away by putting warm bodies in there. I remember when I was managing Ken Blanchard Speaking, Ken was hired to do a keynote for a shoe retailer, one of the discount shoe retailers. And they wanted to meet Ken before he was doing the presentation to kind of, get to know him and tell him some of the challenges. And I'll never forget this. The CEO flies in on his corporate jet. We go down to General Aviation. We pick him up. We go to a nice dinner. We're talking. I'm just the guy putting these two people together. That was my job. And all of a sudden, the guy said to Ken, and I'm sitting there, he goes, our whole way of operating is we want shoes in the back door and shoes out the front door. And I looked at him because Ken and I have a great relationship, and he backs me. He has my back in these situations, or had my back. And I said to him, then why are you hiring him to talk about customer service? And he looked at me like, he ended up we still got the opportunity, but geez, think about how many retailers think about product in the back door, out the front door, without anything in between. And it's how we're hiring people. We don't want anything between their ears. We don't want them to think. We want them to quote policy and check people out and not give them a great customer experience. I'm sure you, Kent, and I could sit here and share customer service horror stories for hours because we've all experienced it. And that trend has to change because retail will only survive and thrive if we get to create those unique customer experiences. And online's fine. Online works. It's not the only way. And retailers have to understand that what's going to help them thrive is those unique customer experiences, because there's something about looking through a rack of clothes or you name it, whatever you're trying to buy online, there is a customer experience in person that's tactile, that makes you feel good, that instant gratification, all those things about shopping. Or buying something. Men don't shop. Women shop, men buy. And it's just something that we like, that connection to people. We don't want to sit there in a lazy boy with hot pockets shopping and having packages delivered to our house that a porch pirate will steal. All right, I'm off my soapbox, okay?
Yeah, that's pretty good stuff, and and I obviously we could not agree more. That's why we're talking today, and I hope that as people listen to this, it reinforces our commitment to the front line, the folks that are actually engaging with your customers. As we wind this down, as we're running out of time here, Harry, as we wind this down, what kind of a manager, what kind of a leader does it take to create this kind of culture? Is there a sense of what it takes to stand in the gap? And that person who's in the lead role with the accountability to hire, bring those people in, reinforce that culture, train to that culture. What does it take in a leader role to make sure this is happening?
I think it's, first of all, with any good leader, get your ego out of the way and realize two things. One is none of us are as smart as all of us. We need everyone's ideas to move in that direction of excellence. I think that's first and foremost. The second thing is, when you are a leader or a manager, please remember you are a support person. Your job is to make sure everyone has everything they need to be their best and to give their best and to live the vision, mission, and values of your organization. It's your only job. Support person. And that's when go back to what I first said, get your ego out of the way and realize you need these people.
Yeah, I love that.
Support
And the
them.
manager is not always the best salesman.
No, the manager manages.
No, and they don't have all the answers. So you could see.
The manager manages the best salesman.
Right. And gives them everything you need. You walk in that door, what do you need today from me?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. That's
What do most managers do nowadays? They stand there with their arms folded and watch over everyone and say, why aren't you working? Leering at people with their arms folded. That works with a pit boss in Las Vegas. They're great. They stand there in their Armani suit with their arms folded, looking down their nose to make sure everyone's dealing okay. Doesn't work anywhere else.
Well, this way you're talking, it sounds, and it reminds me, this is complex. This is challenging. To create an emotional experience that a customer loves is not going to get any easier. It's becoming more complex. And so it's more work, it's more focus, it's higher standards, and it's a commitment to culture.
But it's well worth it.
And the payoff, obviously the payoff is in your revenue, profitability, and livelihood.
Yeah.
So, Harry, as we've talked.
Yeah, well said. It works. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Fire away.
It works. It makes a difference. And yes, none of what you and I spoke about today is a light switch where you walk on to the wall, you press it on. We got great customer service. It takes a lot of work, as you said. I just wanted to reinforce that, Dan and Ken. You got to pay attention to this and really work at it and realize your job is, when that person crosses the threshold, to wow them with an incredible customer experience.
It's not an accident.
So, Harry, in closing, as we've been listening to you talk today, you've rattled off just so many books that you were a key part of. It reminds me of the movie Forrest Gump, where Forrest Gump kept showing up at all these historical events in time. He was the continuum through American history. And it seems as if you may be that Forrest Gump in the great business books of our time that you tended to be connected to. And I think if our listeners didn't know that about you, that's an interesting story. So maybe we wrap up with any books that you think our audience would really benefit from your experience. What should we be reading? What should we be looking at right now that perhaps is particularly captured your attention for folks that are focused and interested in this?
Well, besides my books, obviously.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make that point.
We start with that, yeah.
My friend Jack Mitchell has some of the best customer service and retailing books out there. And his first book, his best-selling book, is Hug Your Customers. None better for retail. Absolutely none. Customer service book, Raving Fans by Ken Blanchard. Outstanding book. And Jack's other book is Hug Your People, because after he realized, hug your customers, he goes, man, if I don't hug my people, they're not going to hug my customers.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking today with Harry, the Fish Guy. Harry Paul, thank you so much for getting up early on the West Coast and joining us today. This has been fascinating stuff, and we really appreciate it. How might our audience go find you if they wanted to read more, find more about you? Give us some ways to contact you for, who knows, whatever you may be able to bring them.
I guess the easiest way is my website, harrythefishguy.com. I try to keep it simple. Everything about me is there, about my speaking, about my 7 books. I haven't put anything about my 8th book, which is pretty much based on retailing, coming out, called Nuts and Bolts at this particular time. Who knows if it'll change. It's about a small family-owned hardware store chain in the Midwest. Family-owned, operated 120 years, and one day the owner's brother and sister walk into work that day, and across the street from them is a big orange and black sign that says, Future Home Depot. And then they go, what are we going to do? And that's the book. How to compete in that situation.
Can't wait. When's that going to come out, Harry?
Well, the book is written right now, and I am sending it out to people for review, Dan.
Okay. Awesome.
So, yeah, I keep at it, but best way to get in touch with me, harrythefishguy.com.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and we really wish you well with the book, and thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
That's it for this episode. You can find Mandatory Listening on iTunes or wherever you get and subscribe to your podcasts. We'd love to hear what you think, so make sure and leave us comments on iTunes or on our website at mangroup.net, where you'll find all of our episodes. That's MANNgroup.net. Thanks for listening.